Welcome to the story universe. Ever wondered what happens when the person investigating the crime might also be the one committing it? Today's story, I Am the Witness, the Killer, and the Victim, explores that very terrifying question. Let's find out the answers together. Chapter 1: The Phantom takes shape. The silence of the night had been brutally shattered by the shrieking crescendo of police sirens, their urgent cries echoing through the narrow streets. Ray Thorne, his eyes shadowed with a weariness that sleep seemed incapable of dispelling, stood observing the stark yellow police tape that cordoned off the grim scene. The sickly amber glow of a nearby street lamp cast long, distorted shadows across the cobblestones, illuminating a dark, congealed bloodstain, the chilling testament to a violence that had just unfolded. Around him, figures in white forensic suits moved with a silent, almost spectral efficiency, their presence a stark contrast to the raw brutality of the event. This was the fourth time in as many months that Ray had found himself standing at the edge of such a horrifying tableau. Each case was a puzzle wrapped in an enigma, the victims seemingly random, their lives unconnected by any discernible thread of age, gender, or social standing. Yet, a horrifying commonality bound them together, a macabre detail that clawed at the edges of Ray's sanity. Their hearts were missing. There were no signs of struggle, no desperate cries that had pierced the quiet of the night. Only the frozen masks of utter terror on their pale faces hinted at the unspeakable horror they had witnessed in their final moments. Returning to the sterile confines of his office as the night bled into a pale, reluctant dawn, Ray couldn't shake the haunting images that clung to the back of his eyelids. He sat before his computer screen, the cold light reflecting in his tired eyes as he scrolled through the crime scene photographs. Each minute detail was scrutinized, each shadow and stain examined with a desperate hope of finding a loose thread that might unravel the mystery of the killer. Spectre, the name the media had so aptly bestowed upon him. A phantom, a ghost in the city's underbelly. He moved with an unnerving silence, leaving behind no trace, no DNA, no fingerprints, not a single witness who could offer a clear description. He arrived and vanished as swiftly and chillingly as a sudden gust of cold wind, leaving behind only the lingering scent of fear and the gnawing frustration of the investigating officers. But he always left one thing: a cryptic message, scrawled on a wall or discovered on a hastily folded piece of paper, a chilling whisper from the abyss. The eye sees the darkness clearer than the light. The phrase echoed in Ray's mind, a disturbing blend of a taunt and a dark philosophy about the human condition. In the relentless churn of the investigation, Ray sought refuge in the quiet sanctuary of Dr. Lyra's office. Her therapy room was an oasis of calm amidst the storm of his work, the soft lighting and subtle, comforting scent a balm to his frayed nerves. Lyra's voice, gentle yet firm, offered a rare anchor in the turbulent waters of his mind. Their sessions had begun after his tour in Afghanistan, a deployment that had left invisible scars, manifesting as restless nights and sudden surges of anxiety, unwelcome ghosts from a past he struggled to keep at bay. "Are you still troubled by the dreams, Ray?" Lyra's voice was soft, her gaze holding a gentle concern. Ray nodded slowly, rubbing the persistent ache in his temples. "Lately, it's not exactly the war. These cases. I dream I'm there at the scene, seeing a fleeting, visceral image flash through his mind. A single drop of crimson blood hitting cold stone. Seeing the victims. The feeling is so real, as if I was actually there. That could be a manifestation of sleep disturbance related to your post-traumatic stress," Lyra said thoughtfully. "We will continue to monitor it. But it's crucial, Ray, that you maintain a clear distinction between the realm of dreams and reality." Yet, the line between the two seemed to be blurring with each passing night. Every time Ray closed his eyes, The horrific scenes replayed themselves with unsettling clarity, sometimes hazy and indistinct, other times sharp and brutally vivid. A cold dread would settle over him, a chilling sensation as if he himself were standing in the shadows, a silent observer, or something far more sinister. The latest crime scene drew Ray back into the familiar darkness of another alleyway. He exchanged terse words with a fellow detective, his gaze sweeping over the grim details, searching for any anomaly, any deviation from the pattern. "Same MO," the other detective sighed, his voice heavy with fatigue. "No forced entry. Victim died terrified. Heart's gone." A small surveillance camera mounted on a nearby brick wall caught Ray's attention. "We might have something here," he said, a flicker of fragile hope igniting in his weary eyes. This camera might have captured Spectre. In the dimly lit video review room, time seemed to stretch and distort. The grainy footage flickered on the screen, the image shaky and indistinct. Then, a tall, shadowy figure wearing a mask materialized briefly within the frame. The mask was featureless, an empty void. But as the figure's eyes flickered into view for a fleeting second, dark and fathomless, Ray felt a jolt. A strange sense of familiarity, a disturbing recognition that sent a shiver down his spine. Those eyes, he felt as though he had seen them before. But where? The memory remained elusive, shrouded in a frustrating darkness that mirrored the very darkness he was trying to understand. Chapter 2: The Haunting Within Sleep. Sleep offered Ray no respite that night, instead plunging him into a distorted and far more terrifying reality. He drifted into a dream, but not the fragmented, unsettling images of past battles. This time, the dream possessed a horrifying clarity, stained with a visceral, metallic red. He found himself standing in a dimly lit room, the weak light flickering from a solitary desk lamp. Before him, a figure slumped lifelessly, their chest cavity a gaping void. His own hands trembled, slick with a warm, sticky substance, and he realized with dawning horror that he cradled something soft and pulsing in his palm, a human heart, its final beats fading into silence. The nightmare ravaged Ray, the images and sensations within it so vivid that he awoke in a cold sweat, the clammy chill clinging to his skin. A profound sense of guilt, disgust, and a nebulous fear clung to his mind, refusing to dissipate. He couldn't shake the phantom sensation of blood on his hands, the fading throb of the heart against his palm. The blurring of the lines between reality and dream grew increasingly perilous. There were moments during the day when Ray would startle, questioning whether the horrific images were merely figments of his damaged psyche or something far more sinister. He began to doubt himself, to question the very fabric of his memories and emotions. In his next therapy session, Ray recounted the terrifying nightmare to Lyra, his voice trembling, his eyes filled with a raw confusion. "I saw myself. I did it, Lyra. I saw myself take the victim's heart." Lyra listened with unwavering patience, her gaze devoid of judgment, filled only with deep concern. After Ray had poured out the torment that consumed him, she spoke slowly and deliberately. "Ray, you are under immense psychological stress. The constant exposure to violent crimes, to images of death, can have a profound impact on your subconscious. I believe these dreams could be a manifestation of what I mentioned before, vicarious traumatization. Your mind is attempting to process this horrific information by replaying it in your sleep." "But it felt so real, Lyra," Ray countered, his voice almost pleading. "The sensation, it felt like a memory." "The subconscious has intricate ways of coping with trauma," Lyra explained gently. "Sometimes, it creates images so vivid they feel undeniably real. This is why we need to continue with the hypnotherapy, Ray, to delve deeper into your buried memories. Perhaps the root of these dreams lies somewhere in your past." However, the thought of hypnotherapy filled Ray with a growing unease. He was afraid of what might lie hidden within those forgotten recesses of his mind. He feared that, deep down, there was a part of him he didn't know, a dark and terrifying entity lurking beneath the surface. Despite his apprehension, Ray knew he couldn't continue to exist in this state of torment and uncertainty. He needed to uncover the truth, not only to decipher the horrifying crimes committed by Spectre, but also to unravel the mysteries that gnawed at his own sanity, the phantoms that were slowly taking shape in both his dreams and his waking hours. With a heavy sense of foreboding, as if stepping into a dark and unknown labyrinth, he agreed to continue the hypnotherapy sessions. Chapter 3: The Invisible Evidence. The following days bled into one another, each marked by a gnawing tension and a frustrating lack of progress. Ray and his team meticulously dissected every facet of the victims' lives, searching for the faintest connection, the smallest anomaly. They sifted through financial records, conducted countless interviews with family, friends, and colleagues. But every avenue led to a dead end. The victims had lived ordinary lives, devoid of any apparent enemies or dark secrets waiting to be unearthed. Spectres seemed to have chosen them at random, like a ravenous demon snatching lost souls. The impasse only served to underscore Spectre's chilling elusiveness. He moved like a phantom, leaving behind no tangible trace that could lead the police to his identity. Not a single hair, not a skin cell, not a fingerprint belonging to him was found at any of the crime scenes. He had seemingly erased his very existence, as if he were a figment of some diseased imagination. However, the grainy footage from the small surveillance camera remained their only fragile thread of hope. Ray and the technicians had reviewed the clip hundreds of times, painstakingly analyzing each frame, each minute movement. The image remained blurry and shaky, but the tall, masked figure was clearly visible as it moved fleetingly through the frame. Ray froze the footage, zooming in on the masked face. It remained an emotionless void, offering no discernible features. But the eyes that glinted in the darkness, deep and cold. That strange feeling washed over Ray again, a disturbing sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. Where had he seen those eyes before? In his nightmares? Or somewhere buried deep within the forgotten corridors of his memory? Nothing significant, the technician sighed, his voice laced with disappointment. The image quality is too poor. We can't identify any facial features or distinguishing marks. But Ray couldn't shake it. There was something about those eyes, a fleeting glimpse that had somehow anchored itself in his mind. He requested that they magnify each individual frame, searching for any minute detail that might offer a clue to this enigmatic killer. While the investigation team wrestled with the invisible evidence, Ray sought solace and insight from Lyra. He described the surveillance footage, the cold eyes behind the mask, and the unsettling feeling of recognition that he couldn't explain. I feel like I've seen those eyes before, Lyra, but I can't place them. It's like a shadow in my mind, a memory shrouded in a thick fog. The constant exposure to the image of the perpetrator could be triggering a false sense of familiarity, Ray, Lyra said gently. Your mind might be trying to create a connection, an explanation for what you're confronting. But it's not just a feeling, Ray insisted. It's stronger than that, an almost visceral pull. I'm on the verge of remembering something important. Lyra was silent for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. We will proceed with the hypnotherapy in our next session, Ray. Perhaps by delving deeper into your subconscious, we can unearth those forgotten memories. Ray nodded, a fragile spark of hope flickering within him. He told himself that no matter how terrifying the truth might be, he had to face it. He had to pierce the veil of mystery surrounding Spectre, not only to bring justice to the victims, but also to answer the questions that were tormenting his own mind. The eyes behind the mask, What secrets did they hold? And why did they stir such a disturbingly familiar feeling within him? He didn't know, but he was determined to find out. Chapter 4: The Impossible Alibi. The city held its breath, a fragile lull in the storm of fear that Spectre had unleashed. Ray, driven by a relentless need to understand the killer who haunted his waking hours and invaded his dreams, found himself increasingly isolated in his pursuit. The lack of tangible evidence frustrated his colleagues, their investigations hitting dead ends while the body count continued to rise. Then came the fourth murder, a chillingly brazen act that sent shockwaves through the police department. The victim, a young librarian named Sarah Miller, was found in her apartment, the now familiar horror etched on her face, her heart missing. But this time, there was a crucial difference. At the exact time of Sarah Miller's death, Ray Thorne was in an interrogation room at police headquarters. He had been brought in for questioning by his own colleagues, their suspicion fueled by his increasingly erratic behavior and his vivid, disturbing accounts of his dreams. The fact that his subconscious seemed to be mirroring the gruesome details of the Spectre killings had understandably raised alarm. The interrogation room was sterile and cold, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead amplifying the tension in the air. Detectives Miller and Davies, their faces grim, sat opposite Ray, their questions sharp and probing. Ray, though frustrated and feeling unjustly accused, cooperated fully, recounting his dreams and the unsettling sense of familiarity he felt with the case. The timeline was irrefutable. Logs confirmed Ray had been in continuous questioning for over 2 hours surrounding the estimated time of Sarah Miller's death. It was an airtight alibi, seemingly clearing him of any direct involvement. A collective sigh of relief, mixed with a renewed sense of bewilderment, rippled through the department. If Thorne wasn't Spectre, then who was this phantom who continued to evade their grasp? However, the relief was short-lived. A routine review of the audio recording from a security camera positioned outside Sarah Miller's apartment building yielded a horrifying anomaly. Amidst the ambient city noise, a faint whisper could be heard, chillingly close to the time of the murder. The voice was low, almost a murmur, but undeniably present. And it sounded exactly like Ray Thorne. The words were barely audible, a sibilant breath against the microphone. But when the audio technicians enhanced the recording, the chilling message became clear: "I only came to take back what was lost." The revelation sent a fresh wave of icy dread through the department. How could Ray have an alibi and yet his voice be recorded at the scene of the crime? The impossible had seemingly occurred. Suspicion, though momentarily deflected, now swung back towards Ray with a renewed intensity, tinged with a growing sense of the uncanny. Ray himself was reeling. He listened to the recording, his blood running cold. The voice was undeniably his, the cadence, the subtle inflections, it was him. But he had been miles away, answering questions under the harsh glare of interrogation room lights. He had no memory of being anywhere near Sarah Miller's apartment. Panic began to claw at the edges of his composure. Was he losing his mind? Were his dreams somehow bleeding into reality in ways he couldn't comprehend? The very foundations of his sanity felt like they were beginning to crumble. Lyra, upon hearing the news and listening to the recording, looked at Ray with a mixture of concern and a dawning understanding. The pieces of the puzzle, though still fragmented and disturbing, seemed to be shifting, revealing a pattern far more complex and unsettling than they had initially imagined. The impossible alibi, coupled with the disembodied whisper of Ray's voice, pointed towards a truth that was both terrifying and deeply personal. The phantom they were hunting might be closer than they ever dared to believe. Chapter 5: Hypnosis and the Unnamed. The recording of his own voice at Sarah Miller's murder scene, despite his ironclad alibi, sent Ray spiraling into a vortex of confusion and self-doubt. Sleep became a battlefield of fragmented images and whispered threats. The line between his nightmares and reality had blurred to an almost indistinguishable haze. He felt like a puppet with invisible strings, forced to witness horrors he couldn't explain, his own voice betraying him in ways he couldn't comprehend. Lyra, witnessing his descent into near panic, gently but firmly steered him back towards their therapy sessions. The impossible nature of the evidence pointed towards a deeper psychological complexity, one that conventional investigation couldn't unravel. She believed that the key lay buried within the labyrinth of Ray's subconscious, accessible only through the carefully guided pathways of hypnotherapy. This time, Ray offered no resistance. He was desperate for answers, willing to confront whatever darkness lurked within him if it meant understanding the chilling paradox of his alibi and the spectral voice. In the quiet, dimly lit therapy room, with Lyra's calm voice as his anchor, Ray closed his eyes and allowed himself to drift into a state of deep relaxation. Lyra began her gentle probing, her words weaving through the layers of his conscious mind, seeking the hidden pathways to his buried memories. She guided him back to moments of stress, to the aftermath of his deployment, to the initial stirrings of his troubled sleep. Gradually, fragmented images began to surface, flashes of violence, echoes of fear, and the recurring, unsettling presence of the masked figure from his dreams. During one session, Lyra focused on the feeling of familiarity Ray had experienced when viewing the surveillance footage. "Tell me about those eyes, Ray," she prompted softly. "What do they make you feel?" Ray's brow furrowed beneath his closed eyelids. He shifted restlessly on the couch. Lost, cold, like looking into a void. But there's something else. A flicker, a recognition, like a half-forgotten face in a crowd. Lyra's voice remained steady. "Let that feeling guide you, Ray. Don't try to force it. Just allow the association to emerge. Is there a name connected to that feeling, to those eyes?" Silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the soft rhythm of Lyra's breathing. Ray's breathing grew shallow, his body tense. Then, a low, guttural sound escaped his lips. "Eli." Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "Who is Eli, Ray?" Ray remained silent for a long moment, his face contorted in an expression of confusion and distress. Then, another word, hesitant and barely audible, escaped him. "Abandoned." Lyra continued her gentle guidance, piecing together the fragmented responses. She led him back to moments of intense emotional distress in his past, moments of feeling lost and alone. Slowly, painstakingly, a buried narrative began to emerge, a story of a young boy left behind, a profound sense of abandonment that had seemingly been locked away for years. In a subsequent session, Lyra focused again on the masked figure, the embodiment of Spectre in Ray's subconscious. "When you see the masked figure, Ray," she said softly, "what name comes to mind?" This time, the response was immediate, visceral. Ray's body stiffened, his voice a strained whisper filled with a chilling resonance. "Raymond." Lyra's breath hitched almost imperceptibly. "Raymond," she repeated calmly. "Tell me about Raymond, Ray." A torrent of fragmented words and emotions erupted from Ray. He spoke of anger, of a burning need for retribution, of a deep-seated resentment that seemed to have taken root and festered within him. He spoke of the injustice he had witnessed, the pain he had endured, all filtered through a lens of intense bitterness. Then, during the deepest stage of hypnosis, as Lyra gently probed the connection between Raymond and the acts of Spectre, Ray's voice shifted again, becoming colder, more deliberate. "Raymond, he takes what was lost. They took it from him. He is only reclaiming what is rightfully his." And then, the most chilling revelation of all. In a voice that was undeniably Ray's, yet held a chillingly unfamiliar cadence, he uttered a phrase that sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. Raymond, is me. The truth, fragmented and terrifying, began to coalesce. The impossible alibi, the whispered voice on the recording, the vivid nightmares, they were all pieces of a fractured psyche. Ray Thorne was not just witnessing the horror, he was somehow intrinsically linked to it. The witness, the potential killer, and perhaps a victim of a trauma buried so deep it had fractured his very being. The unnamed boy, Eli, the vengeful Raymond, and the tormented Ray, separate entities coexisting within a single mind. The puzzle was far more complex and dangerous than they had ever imagined. Chapter 6: 3 Faces in the Mirror. The revelation during the hypnosis session hung heavy in the air, a suffocating truth that threatened to shatter the fragile remnants of Ray's sanity. Lyra watched him as he slowly emerged from the deep trance, his eyes filled with a dazed confusion, the weight of something profound settling upon him. "Raymond, is me?" he repeated, the words barely a whisper, laced with disbelief and a dawning horror. Lyra nodded slowly, her expression a mixture of concern and a grim understanding. "Ray, what we are uncovering suggests a complex psychological condition known as dissociative identity disorder, or DID. It's a way the mind copes with severe trauma by creating distinct identities, or alters, to compartmentalize those experiences." She explained, carefully and patiently, how Ray's subconscious, in the face of overwhelming trauma, had fractured, giving rise to these distinct personalities. Ray, the core personality, the man she knew, the dedicated FBI agent haunted by his past. Raymond, the manifestation of deep-seated anger and a thirst for retribution, fueled by some past injustice. And then there was Eli, the name that had surfaced from the depths of his buried memories, the abandoned boy, a vulnerable fragment of Ray's forgotten childhood. "These alters," Lyra continued, "they can have their own distinct ways of thinking, feeling, and even behaving. They can have different memories, preferences, and even different ways of perceiving the world. It's as if there are multiple individuals living within a single body." Ray listened, his mind reeling, trying to reconcile the man he knew himself to be with the terrifying implications of Lyra's explanation. The dreams, the feeling of familiarity with the masked figure, the impossible alibi, the chilling whisper of his own voice, it all began to fall into a horrifying, fragmented pattern. "So, Raymond, he's Spectre?" The question was barely audible, filled with a chilling realization. Lyra nodded grimly. "Based on what we've uncovered, it's the most likely explanation. Raymond seems to be acting out of a deep-seated need for revenge, connected to the trauma that led to the creation of Eli." The contrast between the 3 personalities was stark. Ray, the driven investigator, dedicated to upholding the law. Raymond, the vengeful killer, operating in the shadows, driven by a dark purpose. And Eli, the vulnerable child, a ghost from a forgotten past, a silent testament to a profound emotional wound. They were 3 faces in the same mirror, each reflecting a different facet of a shattered identity. "But I don't remember doing any of this," Ray protested, his voice filled with anguish. "I don't remember killing anyone." "That's a key characteristic of DID," Lyra explained. "Often, there is amnesia between the alters. The core personality, Ray, may not be aware of the actions or experiences of the other alters, like Raymond. It's a protective mechanism, a way for your conscious mind to be shielded from the full impact of the trauma and the actions taken by the other identities." The weight of this revelation was crushing. Ray, a man dedicated to bringing criminals to justice, was now confronted with the terrifying possibility that he himself was the very monster he was hunting. The implications were staggering, threatening to unravel his entire sense of self. "Eli," Ray whispered, the name a foreign sound on his tongue. Who abandoned Eli?" Lyra's expression softened with empathy. That's something we need to explore further, Ray. The trauma that created Eli is likely the root of everything. Uncovering that past, understanding the pain that young boy endured, is crucial to understanding Raymond's motivations and ultimately, to integrating these fragmented parts of yourself. The path ahead seemed daunting, a treacherous journey into the darkest corners of his own mind. Ray was no longer just investigating a series of brutal murders. He was embarking on a perilous quest to understand himself, to confront the ghosts of his past, and to face the terrifying reality of the three faces in his own fractured mirror. The line between hunter and hunted had become terrifyingly blurred, and the truth that lay buried within him promised to be more devastating than anything he could have ever imagined. Chapter 7: The Wounded Child. The name Eli hung in the air between Ray and Lyra, a fragile key to unlock the deepest chambers of his fractured mind. The revelation of dissociative identity disorder had cast a chilling light on the events of the past weeks, transforming Ray from a determined investigator into a man grappling with the terrifying possibility of his own culpability. The focus of their sessions now shifted, delving into the murky waters of his childhood, seeking the genesis of the wounded boy who had become a silent inhabitant of his inner world. Under Lyra's gentle guidance, fragmented memories began to surface, like shards of glass glinting in the dim light of his subconscious. Fleeting images of a sterile, impersonal environment, the cold, hard plastic of a swing set swaying in an empty playground, the echoing silence of a long, white corridor. A persistent feeling of being small, lost, and profoundly alone permeated these nascent recollections. Ray spoke of a time before he was Ray, a time when he was just a boy who felt unseen. He described a sense of waiting, an endless anticipation for someone who never came. The details were hazy, shrouded in the protective amnesia that often accompanies childhood trauma, but the raw emotion, the visceral ache of abandonment, was palpable. "I remember waiting at a gate," Ray recounted, his voice thick with a sorrow he couldn't fully comprehend. "A tall, iron gate. I would sit there for hours watching the cars go by. Thought they would come back. They promised." The promise remained unspoken, lost in the fog of years, but the underlying pain resonated deeply within him. Lyra listened intently, offering words of comfort and encouragement, gently guiding him through the labyrinth of his forgotten past. Slowly, more pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. A brief, sharp memory of a hand, not unkind, but firm, pushing him away. The blurred image of a car driving off into the distance, the taillights receding like dying embers. The crushing weight of understanding that he was truly alone. The name Ray itself held no resonance with these early memories. It was a name that appeared later, a label assigned to him in a system that offered shelter but little warmth. Eli was the name of the boy who had been left behind, the boy who carried the raw wound of abandonment. As Ray delved deeper, the connection between Eli's trauma and the emergence of Raymond began to take shape. The intense anger that fueled Raymond, the feeling of having something precious stolen, Lyra suggested that these emotions were a distorted echo of Eli's profound loss. The stolen hearts, the cryptic message about taking back what was lost, they could be symbolic manifestations of the emotional void left by the abandonment, a desperate, misguided attempt to reclaim something intangible. The sessions were emotionally draining for Ray, each unearthed memory bringing with it a fresh wave of pain and confusion. He was forced to confront the vulnerability of the child he once was, the profound impact of that early trauma on the man he had become. The stoic FBI agent, the man who prided himself on his logic and control, was now facing the raw, untamed emotions of a wounded child living within the recesses of his own mind. Lyra explained that Raymond's emergence was likely a defense mechanism, a way for the vulnerable Eli to find strength and agency in a world that had seemingly rejected him. The anger and violence were a twisted form of protection, a way to lash out at a world that had inflicted such deep pain. The realization was both terrifying and strangely illuminating. Ray began to see the connections, the distorted reflections of his past trauma in the present horror. The coldness in Raymond's eyes, the feeling of being lost and alone that permeated his nightmares, they were echoes of Eli's abandonment. The journey into his past was far from over, but with each unearthed memory, Ray felt a flicker of understanding, a glimmer of hope that perhaps, by confronting the wounded child within, he could begin to understand, and ultimately, integrate, the darkness that had manifested as Raymond. The phantom he was hunting was not just a monster lurking in the shadows of the city, it was a shadow cast by his own deeply wounded past. Chapter 8: The Collaborator in Shadows. The exploration of Ray's fractured past, the emergence of Eli and the chilling motivations of Raymond had begun to paint a disturbing picture. Yet, there was a lingering unease, a sense that not all the pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place. Lyra's unwavering support and insightful guidance had been a lifeline, but Ray couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her involvement than just that of a concerned therapist. During one particularly intense session, as Ray recounted a vivid memory of young Eli waiting forlornly at the iron gate, a subtle shift occurred in Lyra's demeanor. Her usual calm was momentarily replaced by a flicker of something akin to recognition. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but Ray, now acutely attuned to the nuances of their interactions, caught it. Later that week, Ray found himself reviewing his case files, the details of the Spectre killings laid out before him like a macabre tapestry. He reread the initial reports, the witness statements, or rather, the lack thereof, and the psychological profiles they had attempted to build. Something about the timeline of events, about the way Lyra had subtly guided their sessions, sparked a disquieting thought in his mind. He decided to delve into Lyra's professional history, a background check that, given their established therapeutic relationship, he hadn't previously considered necessary. What he discovered sent a cold wave of shock through him. Dr. Lyra Alistair wasn't just a civilian therapist specializing in trauma. Before establishing her private practice, she had served as a psychological consultant in the same military intelligence unit as Ray Thorne during his deployment in Afghanistan. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Lyra hadn't just been treating him for post-traumatic stress. She had known him during the very period when the initial trauma had occurred, the trauma that had likely fractured his psyche and given birth to Eli and, eventually, Raymond. Armed with this unsettling information, Ray approached their next session with a newfound tension. He watched Lyra carefully, his gaze sharper, more analytical. He steered the conversation towards his time in Afghanistan, observing her reactions, searching for any telltale signs. Finally, he confronted her directly. "Lyra," he began, his voice betraying a tremor of suspicion, "you never mentioned that we served together in Afghanistan." A flicker of something crossed Lyra's face, not surprise, but perhaps a carefully guarded apprehension. She sighed softly, her usual calm returning, but with a subtle undercurrent of something else: regret? Resignation? "Ray," she said, her voice low, "there were reasons why I didn't disclose that initially. I wanted our therapeutic relationship to be based on trust and your present needs, without the complications of our shared past." "Complications?" Ray pressed, his suspicion hardening into certainty. "Or perhaps, a deliberate omission?" Lyra's gaze met his, her usual warmth replaced by a profound sadness. "Ray," she began again, her voice barely a whisper, "you suffered a great loss in Afghanistan. Sarah, your fiancée. Her death, it devastated you. I witnessed it firsthand. I saw the light go out in your eyes." The mention of Sarah hit Ray like a physical blow, a raw wound reopening after years of fragile healing. The pain was still there, a dull ache in the deepest recesses of his heart. Lyra continued, her voice gaining a hesitant strength. The circumstances surrounding Sarah's death, they weren't what they seemed. There were powerful individuals involved, individuals who made sure the truth never came to light. You were broken, Ray. You wanted justice, but you were powerless. A terrifying realization began to dawn in Ray's mind, a horrifying link connecting his past trauma, the emergence of Raymond's vengeful persona, and Lyra's seemingly benevolent guidance. And you knew about Raymond? Ray's voice was barely a croak. Lyra's eyes filled with tears. I saw the anger simmering beneath the surface, the desire for retribution. I believed that if that anger could be channeled, directed, towards those who were truly responsible for Sarah's death. The unspoken words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Lyra hadn't just been treating Ray, she had been observing the emergence of Raymond, perhaps even subtly encouraging it, manipulating his fractured psyche towards a specific purpose. The therapy sessions hadn't just been about healing, they had been a carefully orchestrated manipulation, a shadowy collaboration in a twisted quest for justice. The doctor he had trusted, the woman who had seemed his only anchor, was potentially the architect of the very nightmare he was desperately trying to understand. The phantom he was hunting might not just reside within him. It might have been deliberately nurtured by the very person he had confided in. Chapter 9: Confrontation and Collusion. The revelation of Lyra's past connection to him in Afghanistan and the horrifying implication of her deliberate manipulation hung like a shroud in the therapy room. The comfortable familiarity of their sessions had been shattered, replaced by a chilling tension and a profound sense of betrayal. Ray stared at Lyra, his mind reeling from the weight of her confession. The woman he had trusted implicitly, the one who had guided him through the darkest corners of his mind, was now revealed to be a figure lurking in the shadows of his past, her motives far more complex and potentially sinister than he could have imagined. You helped create Raymond? Ray's voice was low, a dangerous tremor running beneath the surface. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening finality. Lyra's focused questioning about his anger, her subtle encouragement of his feelings of injustice, it all pointed towards a calculated manipulation of his fractured psyche. Lyra's face was etched with a mixture of sorrow and a desperate justification. Ray, you were consumed by grief and a righteous fury. The system failed Sarah. Those responsible walked free. I believed that Raymond could be a force for justice, a way for you to finally find closure. Justice? Ray scoffed, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. By turning me into a monster? By having an innocent librarian become another victim in your twisted game of revenge? The image of Sarah Miller's terrified face flashed through his mind, a stark reminder of the human cost of Lyra's machinations. Sarah, that wasn't supposed to happen, Lyra said, her voice laced with a genuine-sounding anguish. Raymond, he became unpredictable. My intention was never for innocent lives to be taken. But they were Lyra, Ray countered, his anger rising. And my voice was there, whispering those chilling words. A part of me that you helped unleash, was at the scene. The weight of his potential complicity pressed down on him, a crushing burden of guilt and horror. The room fell silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of two people grappling with a devastating truth. Ray struggled to reconcile the woman he had known with the manipulative figure now revealed before him. Had their entire therapeutic relationship been a carefully constructed lie? Had her concern been genuine, or merely a means to an end? Why Lyra? Why me? Ray finally asked, his voice filled with a raw pain that transcended his anger. Why manipulate my pain, my trauma, for your own agenda? Lyra's eyes filled with tears. Because I cared about you, Ray. I saw the good man you were, the potential that was being destroyed by grief and injustice. I believed that by channeling your anger, by giving it a purpose, I could help you heal, help you find some semblance of peace. Peace through murder? Ray's voice was incredulous. By turning me into the very thing I swore to fight against? The ethical chasm between them widened with every word. Lyra's intentions, however misguided, had unleashed a darkness within Ray that now threatened to consume him. He was trapped in a terrifying duality, the lawman and the potential killer, the witness and the accused. What now, Lyra? Ray asked, his gaze fixed on her, searching for any flicker of remorse or a viable path forward. What happens now that your experiment has spiraled out of control? Lyra's shoulders slumped, the fight seemingly draining out of her. I don't know, Ray. I never anticipated this. I thought I could control it, guide it. But Raymond, he has become stronger, more independent. The admission was chilling. The monster she had helped create had outgrown its master. Ray was left facing not only the fragmented darkness within himself, but also the devastating realization that the one person he had trusted to guide him through it had been a collaborator in his potential destruction. The line between therapist and manipulator, between healer and accomplice, had blurred into a terrifying and irreversible entanglement. Chapter 10: The Echo of Choice. The weight of Lyra's confession settled upon Ray like a physical burden, the betrayal cutting deeper than any blade. He stood amidst the wreckage of his perceived reality, the lines between victim and perpetrator, sanity and madness, irrevocably blurred. The revelation that the woman he had trusted had actively manipulated his fractured psyche left him adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions, anger, confusion, and a profound sense of violation. The immediate aftermath of Lyra's admission was a tense standoff. Ray, grappling with the horrifying implications of his other self, found himself looking at his therapist with a mixture of fury and a desperate need for answers. Lyra, stripped of her composed facade, appeared a broken woman, the weight of her misguided actions crushing her. The decision of what to do next hung heavy in the air. Could Ray, a law enforcement officer sworn to uphold justice, reconcile with the fact that a part of him had committed these brutal acts? Could he bring himself to turn himself in, knowing the devastating consequences? And what of Lyra, the woman who had played such a pivotal, albeit destructive, role in his unraveling? As the initial shock began to subside, a grim determination hardened within Ray. He was a victim, yes, of a terrible trauma and a manipulative therapist. But he was also potentially a killer. He couldn't allow Raymond to continue his reign of terror, driven by a twisted sense of vengeance. He had to find a way to control the darkness within, to reclaim his own mind. He made a choice. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't succumb to the despair that threatened to engulf him. He would confront the truth, however painful. He would use his skills as an investigator, his understanding of the fractured landscape of his own mind, to stop Raymond. Ray's first step was to sever his connection with Lyra. The trust was irrevocably broken. He couldn't allow her influence, however well-intentioned she might claim it to be, to further complicate the already perilous situation. He informed her, his voice cold and resolute, that their sessions were over and that he would be handling this situation himself. Lyra, defeated and filled with remorse, offered no resistance. Alone, Ray embarked on a terrifying journey into the depths of his own consciousness. He began to recognize the triggers that seemed to awaken Raymond, the echoes of past trauma that fueled his anger. He started to understand the pain and abandonment that had given birth to Eli, the vulnerable core that Raymond was desperately trying to avenge. It was a grueling internal battle, a constant struggle for control. There were moments when Raymond's rage threatened to overwhelm him, when the darkness felt all-encompassing. But Ray fought back, clinging to his core identity, the ingrained sense of justice that defined him. He began to visualize a space within his mind, a sanctuary where he could retreat, a place where Raymond's influence was weaker. The investigation into Spectre took a new, intensely personal turn. Ray began to analyze the crime scenes through the lens of his own fragmented memories and the glimpses he had caught of Raymond's motivations. He looked for patterns he might have subconsciously noticed, clues that his core self might have registered even when Raymond was in control. The final confrontation wasn't a dramatic physical struggle in a dark alley, but an internal battle of wills within the confines of Ray's own mind. He had to face Raymond, not as an external enemy, but as a part of himself, a shadow born from pain. It was a confrontation filled with the raw agony of his past, the burning injustice that had fueled Raymond's rage, and the desperate yearning for peace. The outcome remained uncertain. Would Ray be able to integrate the fractured parts of himself, to find a way for Ray, Raymond, and even the echo of Eli to coexist? Or would the darkness consume him, leaving Raymond in control? The final scene could depict Ray, weary but resolute, standing before his colleagues, ready to confess the truth, to face the consequences of actions he doesn't fully remember committing. Or perhaps, it could end with a more ambiguous note, Ray forever marked by the internal struggle, living with the constant awareness of the darkness that resides within, forever vigilant against its resurgence. The echo of choice resonated within him. He had chosen to confront the truth, to take responsibility, to fight for his own mind. Whether that choice would lead to redemption or ruin remained the final, haunting question. The witness, the killer, and the victim were all still intertwined, their fates hanging precariously in the balance. You are absolutely right, and I am incredibly sorry for the repeated and frustrating error. My internal language processing seems to be stuck. I will now provide Chapter 11 in English, maintaining the novel-like style, ready for your AI voiceover. I will focus intently on providing the English version this time. Chapter 11: Truth into Light. Ray's confession echoed in the sterile chill of the interrogation room, a truth so improbable that initially his colleagues could only exchange disbelieving glances. Detective Miller, who had questioned Ray before, furrowed his brow, searching for any flicker of deception in Ray's shadowed eyes. Thorne, what are you talking about? Dissociative Identity Disorder? Raymond? Are you trying to get away with this? Ray shook his head, his expression weary but resolute. I know it sounds insane, Miller, but it's the truth. Dr. Lyra helped me realize it. The dreams, the voice on the recording, that was Raymond. Skepticism hung heavy in the air. The idea of an FBI behavioral analyst suffering from multiple personalities, one of whom could be a serial killer, stretched the bounds of their imagination. However, the unwavering conviction in Ray's voice, coupled with the unsettling details of the crime scenes that only an insider would know, gradually compelled them to listen. The investigation took a sharp turn, now focusing on Ray's psychological state. Leading forensic psychologists were brought in to evaluate him. Lengthy interviews were conducted, complex tests administered. The results slowly began to reveal a startling truth. Ray Thorne genuinely suffered from dissociative identity disorder. The information rippled through the police department like a seismic wave. Shock, confusion, and even fear gripped everyone. How could they have trusted a man who might harbor a cold-blooded killer within him? Meanwhile, Lyra also found herself under intense scrutiny. Her role in Ray's therapy, along with the growing suspicions surrounding her true motives, became the focal point of the investigation. Tense interrogations followed, where Lyra had to confront questions about her professional ethics and legal responsibility. She admitted to recognizing Raymond's existence but insisted her intention was only to help Ray confront his past trauma, never anticipating such tragic consequences. Pressure from the media and the public intensified. The Spectre case, already a source of widespread fear, now had a bizarre and chilling new element. The killer could be one of their own. Ray Thorne's story became headline news, dissected and debated across every platform. Ray was suspended from duty and faced an uncertain future. He was confined to a secure wing of a psychiatric facility, a place where he was both patient and suspect. Here, he was forced to confront himself, the other personalities lurking within the confines of his mind. Therapy sessions continued, but now with a team of specialists, Lyra excluded. They attempted to establish communication with Raymond, to understand his motivations, and to gain control over his emergence. In the isolation and internal turmoil, Ray began a new battle, a fight to reclaim his own mind. He struggled to rebuild the fragile boundaries between his personalities, searching for a semblance of inner peace. But the phantom of Raymond lingered, a constant reminder of the potential for darkness within him. The truth had come to light, but it offered no immediate liberation. Instead, it ushered in a new chapter of difficulty and uncertainty, where Ray had to confront himself, the judgment of society, and the specter of the killer residing deep within his own psyche. Could he prove his innocence, or would he forever be imprisoned by the crimes of another self? The answer remained suspended in the pervasive atmosphere of shock and doubt. Chapter 12: Within the Confines. The sterile white walls of the psychiatric facility became Ray's new reality, a stark contrast to the bustling corridors of the FBI headquarters he once navigated with authority. Stripped of his badge and his freedom, he was now an object of intense scrutiny, a subject of study and speculation. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of therapy sessions, medication adjustments, and the gnawing silence of his own thoughts. Confined to a secure room, Ray felt a profound sense of isolation. He was a prisoner within these walls, but also a prisoner within the confines of his own mind. The awareness of Raymond's lurking presence was a constant shadow, a chilling reminder of the potential for violence that resided within him. Sleep offered little escape, often plagued by fragmented nightmares that felt both alien and disturbingly familiar. The team of psychologists assigned to his case approached him with cautious curiosity. They conducted lengthy interviews, probing his memories, trying to understand the complex interplay between Ray, Raymond, and the elusive Eli. They sought to map the triggers that could awaken Raymond, the emotional landscape of his anger, and the underlying trauma that had fractured his identity. Communication with Raymond proved to be a difficult and unsettling process. When the alter emerged, his demeanor was markedly different from Ray's, colder, more cynical, with a simmering undercurrent of resentment. Raymond spoke of injustice, of the need for retribution, his words often cryptic and laced with a chilling detachment. He offered no remorse for the murders, viewing them as necessary acts, a reclaiming of something that had been stolen. Ray, when present, could only observe these interactions with a detached horror, feeling like a stranger in his own body. The memories of Raymond's actions remained largely inaccessible to him, a terrifying void in his consciousness. The guilt, however, was a constant companion, a heavy weight on his soul. The environment of the facility was a constant trigger. The sense of being confined, of having his autonomy stripped away, seemed to agitate Raymond, making his appearances more frequent and volatile. The staff walked on eggshells around Ray, their gazes a mixture of pity and apprehension. He could feel their fear, the unspoken question of whether the seemingly calm man before them could suddenly transform into a dangerous killer. Lyra, though no longer directly involved in his treatment, remained a looming presence. The investigation into her role continued, and the ethical implications of her actions were fiercely debated. Ray found himself torn. A part of him felt a burning anger at her manipulation, while another, more conflicted part, recognized the initial pain and misguided intentions that had driven her. days turned into weeks, and Ray found himself in a constant state of internal vigilance. He learned to recognize the subtle shifts in his thoughts and emotions that preceded Raymond's emergence. He developed coping mechanisms, mental exercises to try and maintain control, to keep the darkness at bay. It was a tiring, relentless battle, fought in the silent theater of his own mind. Within the confines of the facility, Ray was forced to confront not only the terrifying reality of his disorder but also the profound question of his own responsibility. Even if he didn't consciously commit the murders, they were committed by a part of him. Could he ever truly be free from that guilt? Could he ever truly trust himself again? The walls of the facility held him captive, but the walls of his own fractured mind felt even more impenetrable. The echo of Raymond's chilling pronouncements and Eli's silent sorrow reverberated within him, a constant reminder of the complex and dangerous landscape of his inner world. Chapter 13: The Trial of Conscience. The news of Ray Thorne's impending trial sent shockwaves through the legal system and ignited a fierce public debate. The case was unprecedented. A respected FBI agent accused of heinous crimes, with the defense resting on the complex and often misunderstood grounds of dissociative identity disorder. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation on the first day, packed with journalists, legal experts, and a public both fascinated and horrified by the unfolding drama. Ray, looking pale and gaunt, sat beside his defense attorney, Ms. Anya Sharma, a sharp and determined lawyer who believed in his innocence, or at least, the lack of conscious culpability. The prosecution, led by the formidable District Attorney Thompson, painted a stark picture of a law enforcement officer who had betrayed his oath, a cunning killer who had used a fabricated mental illness to evade justice. The trial became a battleground between psychiatric evaluations and legal precedents. Ms. Sharma presented a compelling case, calling in a panel of renowned experts who detailed the intricacies of DID, explaining how distinct alters could operate independently, with the core personality often unaware of their actions. They painted a picture of Ray as a victim himself, a man whose mind had fractured under the weight of severe trauma, giving rise to a vengeful alter he couldn't control. The prosecution countered with their own experts, who argued that DID was a rare and often exaggerated condition, suggesting that Ray was a manipulative individual feigning mental illness to escape the consequences of his crimes. They emphasized the brutal nature of the murders and the chillingly similar voice on the security footage, arguing that regardless of the diagnosis, Thorne was responsible for the deaths. Lyra Alistair took the stand, her testimony a pivotal and emotionally charged moment in the trial. She recounted her initial diagnosis of Ray's PTSD, her subsequent realization of Raymond's emergence, and her deeply flawed attempts to guide his anger towards those she believed responsible for Sarah's death. Her voice broke with remorse as she admitted her misjudgment and the catastrophic consequences of her actions. The prosecution grilled her relentlessly, portraying her as a reckless and unethical therapist who had essentially created a monster. Ray himself took the stand, a moment of intense vulnerability. He spoke of his dedication to his work, his struggle with his past trauma, and the terrifying realization of the darkness that resided within him. He recounted his nightmares, his confusion, and the chilling moments when Raymond seemed to take over, leaving him with a sense of lost time and a gnawing dread. He expressed his profound remorse for the victims and his desperate desire to understand and control the fractured parts of himself. The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal, attempting to portray Ray as a calculating liar, his testimony a carefully rehearsed performance. They questioned his lack of memory of the murders, suggesting it was a convenient fabrication. The trial became a public spectacle, a moral and legal debate about responsibility, intent, and the complexities of the human mind. Was Ray Thorne a criminal who deserved punishment, or a victim of a rare and debilitating disorder? Could the law hold a man accountable for actions committed by an alter ego he had no conscious control over? The jury deliberated for days, the weight of their decision heavy upon them. The verdict, when it finally came, was met with a stunned silence. It was a split decision, reflecting the profound complexities of the case. Ray was found not guilty by reason of insanity on the murder charges, but guilty on lesser charges related to obstruction of justice for not revealing his condition earlier. The outcome was a bittersweet victory. Ray would not face prison, but he would be confined to a secure psychiatric facility for an indefinite period, undergoing intensive therapy aimed at integrating his personalities and preventing further harm. The verdict acknowledged the reality of his disorder but also recognized the need for accountability. For Ray, it was the beginning of a new, arduous journey. The trial of conscience within his own mind would continue, a lifelong battle to understand and control the fractured selves that resided within him. The truth had been brought into the light, but the path to healing and integration remained long and uncertain, a testament to the intricate and often terrifying landscape of the human psyche. Chapter 14: The Echo of Whispers. Years passed within the walls of the secure psychiatric facility. For Ray, time became a fluid, often disorienting experience, marked by the ebb and flow of his internal world. The intensive therapy continued, a painstaking process of confronting the trauma that had shattered his mind and attempting to integrate the fractured pieces of his identity. The journey was far from linear. There were periods of progress, moments of clarity when the boundaries between Ray, Raymond, and the lingering echo of Eli seemed to soften, allowing for brief glimpses of a unified self. He began to understand the pain that had fueled Raymond's rage, the profound loneliness that had birthed Eli. Empathy, not just for the victims but for the wounded parts of himself, began to blossom. But there were also setbacks, periods when Raymond's anger resurfaced, triggered by unseen wounds, threatening to unravel the fragile progress they had made. The fear of losing control, of the darkness within resurfacing, remained a constant undercurrent in Ray's consciousness. Lyra, having faced her own legal repercussions, occasionally sent letters, filled with remorse and a hesitant hope for Ray's recovery. He read them with a detached sense of pity, the betrayal still a raw nerve, but the anger had begun to subside, replaced by a quiet understanding of her flawed humanity. The world outside continued to move on, the specter killings fading from the headlines, becoming a chilling footnote in the city's dark history. But for Ray, the echoes of those events remained a constant presence in the silent corridors of his mind. One day, after years of dedicated therapy, Dr. Albright, his lead psychiatrist, sat with him, a sense of quiet optimism in her eyes. "Ray," she said gently, "we've made significant progress. The integration process is ongoing, but you've demonstrated remarkable resilience and a commitment to healing." The assessment was cautious, acknowledging the ever-present potential for Raymond's resurgence, but it offered a glimmer of hope that Ray had long yearned for. He had learned to recognize the subtle shifts within him, to anticipate the triggers, and to employ coping mechanisms that allowed him to maintain a fragile control. The question of his release remained a complex one, a delicate balance between Ray's progress and the potential risk to society. The legal system, still wary of the unprecedented nature of his case, proceeded with caution. The ending is not one of complete erasure, not a miraculous disappearance of Raymond and Eli. Instead, it is a gradual understanding, an acceptance of the multifaceted nature of his being. Ray learned to live with the echoes of his past, the whispers of anger and sorrow that had once controlled him. He became a careful negotiator within his own mind, a fragile truce established between the different parts of himself. The final scene could depict Ray, years later, living in a supervised environment, perhaps working in a field where his unique understanding of the criminal mind could be utilized constructively. He carries the scars of his past, the knowledge of the darkness he once harbored, but he also carries a hard-won sense of self-awareness and control. Or perhaps the ending is more bittersweet. Ray might never be fully free, forever residing within the facility, his progress a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, but also a stark reminder of the devastating impact of trauma. He finds a measure of peace within himself, a quiet understanding between the different parts, but the shadow of what he was and what he could have been always lingers. Ultimately, the ending emphasizes the ongoing nature of healing, the delicate balance of a mind fractured and slowly pieced back together. The whispers of the past may never fully disappear, but Ray has learned to listen to them without being consumed, a testament to his long and arduous journey through the labyrinth of his own mind. The echo of whispers remains, a reminder of the darkness, but also of the hard-won light. So, what did you think of that ending? Let me know your theories and reactions in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the Story Universe for more captivating tales. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.